Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you an exciting and transformative story that will change the way you see life and death. Meet Weston Ainsworth, a retired firefighter who, during a flu epidemic in 1994, contracted a serious infection and literally faced death. But upon crossing the threshold between the worlds, Weston discovered something surprising. Life on Earth is an illusion, and our true essence is much greater than we imagine. What he saw on the other side is simply chilling and will leave you speechless. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any incredible content like this. Now, prepare yourself for a spiritual journey that will challenge everything you believe. My name is Weston Ainsworth, and today I'm a retired firefighter living in the quiet, isolated town of Big Sur, California. If you look at me, maybe you just see an ordinary man, with marks of time on his face and some visible scars. Others, however, are invisible and much deeper. I spent nearly 20 years serving as a firefighter, running into danger while everyone else ran away. I saw things that few people could imagine, good and bad. But what I'm about to tell you is unlike anything I experienced while on dry land. In 1994, during a chaotic winter, my life changed forever. It was a time when hospitals were full due to a flu epidemic, and people were struggling with limited medical resources. It was in this confusion that my path took an unexpected turn. I contracted a serious infection while working. I thought it would just be another battle to overcome, like so many others. But instead, it was the experience that redefined what I believed about life, death, and who we really are. I know some people may doubt what I'm about to share, and that's okay. For years, I myself kept my experience secret, fearing judgment from others. But after much reflection, I understood that my silence was a disservice to the message I received. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to tell my story. My intention is simple: to show that, even in the darkest moments, there is something greater waiting for us. When my journey between life and death began, I had no idea what I would find, but what I saw and felt completely changed the way I live my days. So here I am, sitting in this armchair on the porch of my house, looking out at the ocean and remembering every detail of that experience. If you're willing to listen, I promise I'll share something that can shed new light on your own journey. Weston Ainsworth, retired firefighter, survivor of something much bigger than the physical world. That week in 1994 was one of the most difficult of my career. The winter was harsh, and the flu epidemic had filled hospitals in California. As a firefighter, I have always been on the front lines, not only fighting fires but also responding to medical emergencies. One night we received a call to help an elderly woman who had collapsed at home. When we got there, we found a distressing scene. She was pale, feverish, and had a violent cough that seemed to tear her throat. As we carried her to the ambulance, I remember feeling a sneeze straight into my face. Nothing to worry about, I thought at the time. But within a few days, I started to feel sick. First, it was the fever. Then, the incessant vomiting. Every muscle in my body ached, and my energy disappeared like water running through my fingers. Megan, my wife, insisted I go to the hospital when she noticed I was dehydrated and barely able to get out of bed. Once there, the doctors soon noticed that my condition was critical. My blood pressure was dangerously low, and my heart was racing like it was trying to escape my chest. They suspected a serious infection, perhaps even septicemia. In that chaos, doctors were overwhelmed, running from one patient to another, trying to save as many lives as possible. It was in this whirlwind that the error occurred. A young nurse, and in a hurry to ease my pain, gave me a dose of synthetic morphine. At that moment, everything got worse. I felt intense heat rising through my body, followed by a feeling of suffocation, as if my chest was being crushed. I looked at Megan, who was standing next to the bed, and saw the panic in her eyes. "He's going into parade!" shouted someone in the room. The voices began to become distant, as if I were diving into deep water. My heart raced one last time before stopping. At that moment, I felt my body shut down, as if a switch had been flipped. The pain disappeared, and darkness enveloped me completely. But this was not the darkness of the end. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. What happened next was something I will never forget. The moment my heart stopped and darkness enveloped me, I felt immense relief, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my body. It was like leaving a cramped, suffocating space into a vast, free place. I didn't know where I was, but for the first time in days I didn't feel pain, fear, or tiredness. When I opened my eyes, I realized that I was no longer attached to my body. In fact, I could see it. My own body lying in the hospital bed surrounded by frantic doctors and nurses, trying to revive me. Megan was there, with her hands over her face, despair written in every tear that fell. It was strange to look at that scene and not feel panic or urgency. So that's it, I thought. Am I dead? But it didn't feel like death. It felt like freedom. I felt like I was floating above them all, like a feather being carried by a breeze. The higher I went, the less connectivity I felt with that body I called mine. It wasn't important anymore. It was just a wrapper, something I had temporarily used but now seemed irrelevant. As I floated, the environment around me began to change. The hospital ceiling disappeared, giving way to a vast space filled with twinkling lights. These lights were not common. They were stars, but in a way I had never seen before. Each of them pulsed with their own energy, radiating warmth and love. They weren't just inanimate objects. They seemed alive, aware, as if they were watching me and welcoming me. The stars began to surround me, and I felt an indescribable connection with each one of them. It was as if I could hear thoughts, soft melodies, and even laughter. The feeling was one of absolute ecstasy. All the fear I had about dying disappeared. This was not a scary experience. It was liberating. A thought occurred to me. Is this what we really are? Not bodies, but these luminous essences. As I contemplated this, something began to change. The lights around me began to form a path, as if inviting me to go further. And for the first time, I felt a presence beyond myself. Something, or someone, was waiting, following that path formed by the lights. I realized that something else was waiting for me. The feeling was of being guided by a greater force, as if I were destined to get somewhere. The lights that had previously fluctuated randomly now seemed organized, like a corridor of pulsing energy that stretched to infinity. Soon, I began to distinguish shapes on the horizon of lights. 3 small figures appeared, moving towards me. At first glance, they looked like children, but as they got closer, I realized they weren't human. They wore robes that shone like the sun's reflection on water, with hoods covering part of their faces, but I could feel their vibrant personalities. These little beings were unlike anything I had ever seen. They laughed and joked among themselves, like close friends having a light conversation. One of them even turned to me, tilting his head in a curious way. Speechless, I felt like he was saying, "Welcome, Weston. We've been waiting for you." Before I could respond, a new figure emerged behind them. It was much bigger, taller, and more imposing, but in a way that didn't intimidate me. His presence was like a warm hug that enveloped every part of my being. This figure, which radiated a golden light so intense that it seemed almost impossible to look at directly, seemed to be leading the group. "Weston," he said, in a deep, calm tone. The voice was not heard by the ears, but felt directly in the soul. "You have reached the threshold between the worlds, but it's not your time yet." I felt small before him, not out of fear or insignificance, but because of the vastness of his wisdom and love. It was as if he knew every part of me, including the corners I tried to hide. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, even without opening my mouth. "I am a guide," he replied. "You can call me Arathiel." Arathiel then gestured with a glowing hand, and at his movement, my own life began to unfold before me like scenes from a movie. But it wasn't just a review of facts. It was an immersion in feelings, choices, and impacts that I never realized I had caused. The little beings continued laughing and playing, as if everything was part of a big and fun cosmic game. But Arathiel was serious. He looked at me, and I knew there was more to come. When Arathiel extended his glowing hand, a series of images took shape around me, as if space itself was a 3-dimensional canvas. It was my life, every significant moment, every important decision, all there, unfolding before me with a clarity I had never experienced. It wasn't just a review of events. I was reliving the emotions and impacts of each choice. The first scenes were from my childhood. I saw my mother hugging me after a difficult day at school, her love wrapping me like a blanket. I felt the pure joy of riding a bike for the first time, the wind hitting my face. Everything seemed so vivid, so real, as if I were living it all over again. But soon the scenes began to change. I saw my first day as a firefighter, the pride on Megan's face as she adjusted me into my uniform. And then came the hardest moments, the devastating fires, the cries for help, the faces of the people I couldn't save. One specific moment hit me like a blow to the gut. I saw a young man, maybe 19 or 20 years old, trapped in a burning car. I tried my best to reach him, but the flames were too intense. The heat pushed me back like an invisible wall. In the end, I couldn't save him. I failed him, I whispered, feeling the pain of that day as if it were now. Arathiel, who remained by my side, placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You did what you could within human limitations, Weston. No soul is lost. Even when you think you have failed, your intention and efforts resonate in ways you cannot understand. His words brought some comfort, but the sadness persisted. Arathiel then changed the focus of the review, showing moments of positive impact that I had never considered important. I saw a girl I saved from a fire, now a young woman helping others in her community. I saw unfamiliar faces that were touched in indirect but real ways by my actions, even if I never realized it. The message was clear. Every action, no matter how small it may seem, has consequences beyond what our eyes can see. You have a greater purpose, Weston, said Arathiel. The mission you started on Earth has not yet been completed. I looked at him, feeling a mix of confusion and reluctance. I don't want to go back, I confessed. It's so perfect here. Down there, it's pain and suffering. Arathiel smiled tenderly, but his eyes reflected an unshakable firmness. Your time here has not yet come. There is something only you can do. I didn't know what he meant, but the images around me began to fade, leaving me with the feeling that something much bigger was at play. Arathiel's words resonated in my mind like a persistent melody. Your time here has not yet come. Despite the love and serenity that emanated from him, the weight of these words left me uneasy. I didn't want to go back. After feeling such absolute ecstasy, such vast freedom, returning to my physical body felt like punishment. Why me? I asked, staring at Arathiel. My voice was not audible, but he heard my question clear as a thought. I've done enough. I've already done my part. I have scars on my body and soul. Down there, all that awaits me is pain. Arathiel remained calm, but his eyes glowed with an intensity that mixed understanding and determination. It's not about what you've already done, Weston. It's about what you still need to do. Your presence in the physical world has a purpose, even if you don't see it now. I shook my head, frustrated. They will survive without me. Megan is strong, and my life doesn't matter that much. At that moment, Arathiel did something unexpected. He raised his hand, and a new image took shape. It was Megan, sitting alone in our living room. The sun was setting, and she held my framed photo with shaking hands. Tears slid silently down her face. She is strong, yes, said Arathiel, but her absence will leave a void that will never be filled. The image changed again. I saw my team of firefighters gathered together, most of them silent, while the chief gave a speech in my honor. The pain on their faces was almost palpable. You think your life has no impact, Arathiel continued, but look how much you have touched others, and there is more you need to accomplish. I was torn. Part of me understood what he was saying, but another part of me, the part that had tasted the ecstasy of freedom, didn't want to give it up. What if I fail? I asked, hesitantly. What if I go back and it's not enough? Arathiel placed a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to be perfect, Weston. Just being you is enough. What matters is not the absence of failures, but the intention to do good. I looked at the little beings that were still playing around. Carefree, they gave me curious looks, as if waiting for my answer. I don't know if I can, I admitted. Arathiel gave a faint smile, and his voice sounded like a loving echo. You can do it now. At that moment, I felt a pull. It was as if an invisible force began to draw me downward, back into my physical body. I tried to resist, but it wasn't my decision. The light around me began to dissipate, and the sound of the little beings' laughter slowly disappeared. Before returning fully, Arathiel said something I would never forget. Remember, Weston, no one is truly lost. The moment I felt the pull to return to my body was abrupt, almost violent. The ecstasy and calm of the spiritual plane began to fade like a mist blown by the wind, and a new sensation came over me. Density. It was as if I was being compressed, my spiritual essence forced to fit into a space that seemed too small, before returning completely. I experienced something unexpected. I was thrown into a place that was neither the hospital nor that field of light and stars. It was a desolate, lonely, and empty space. There was no light, except for a faint gray glow that seemed to emanate from the floor. There were no sounds, no movements, just an oppressive silence. This place, I thought, is this what they call hell? As I tried to understand where I was, a feeling of unease began to grow. It wasn't fear, but a deep melancholy, as if the place was permeated with the emotions of every soul that had ever passed through there. Arathiel wasn't there, nor were the little beings. I was alone, and for the first time since leaving my body, I felt something close to despair. As I wandered through that space, I began to notice shadows in the distance. They were undefined shapes, like figures that moved slowly, aimlessly. Their presence was almost imperceptible, but I knew they were there. For a moment, I felt a connection with them, as if I could hear their thoughts and feel their pain. It was a reminder of what I had learned. No one is truly lost. Suddenly I heard a voice. It wasn't like Arathiel's, but something internal, like an old memory being reactivated. That's just a reflex, Weston. A place of passage for those who carry regrets, hurts, or feelings of disconnection. But it's not permanent. You don't belong here. With those words, I felt the density begin to decrease. The ground beneath me seemed to dissolve, and my vision went dark again. But this time, it wasn't the oppressive emptiness it had been before. It was a transition, a movement back into the physical world. Suddenly, my body was overcome by an explosion of sensations. I felt the weight of my limbs, the pain in every muscle, and the deafening sound of the machines in the hospital. My heart was racing and the air felt heavy as it entered my lungs. I heard distant voices. "He's back. We have a pulse." I slowly opened my eyes, and the hospital light seemed almost blinding. Megan was next to me, sobbing with relief. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. All I could do was squeeze his hand. I was back, but I knew nothing would be like before. In the first few days after my return, reality seemed surreal. I was alive, but I felt as if part of me had remained on that spiritual plane. Each breath felt like an effort, not just physical, but emotional. My body was weak, and my mind was confused, trying to understand everything that had happened. Megan, as always, was by my side. She held my hand tightly, as if she feared I might disappear again. "You came back to me," she whispered the day I fully woke up. I tried to smile, but the truth was that my heart was still divided. For weeks, I was silent about what I had experienced. How could I explain to someone that I floated among living stars, encountered spiritual beings, and felt the ecstasy of a universal connection? And more importantly, how do I tell this without sounding like I've lost my mind? Even so, the experience left a deep impression on me. I couldn't stop thinking about Arathiel and the words he said to me. "You have a mission, something only you can do." What did this mean? My life as a firefighter seemed to have a clear purpose, but now that I was retired, I felt lost, without direction. I began to mentally revisit the moments I saw during the life review. I realized that many of the small acts I had previously considered insignificant had impacted people in ways I never knew. I remembered the girl I saved from a fire, and the young woman she became. I remembered all the failures that I had carried like a weight, but which now seemed to have been lessons instead of defeats. The sight of Megan's loneliness, holding my photo, haunted me. It was a reminder that my presence in the world was not insignificant. I still had a lot to offer, even if I didn't know exactly how. As my body recovered, I began to open up to Megan about what had happened. His reaction was a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. "Do you believe me?" I asked, afraid of his answer. She held my face in her hands and looked deep into my eyes. "I don't understand everything you went through," she said, "but I know it changed you, and I believe you, Weston." That conversation gave me the courage to share my story with others. Even though I knew I would face skepticism, I realized that my experience was not just for me. It was for everyone who needed comfort, hope, a new perspective on life and death. After my experience, my view on death completely changed. Before I saw it as something to be feared, an inevitable enemy that took lives prematurely. As a firefighter, I have dealt with death many times, in fires, accidents, and even in moments when all I could do was hold someone's hand in the last moments of their life. But now I knew that death was not the end. I clearly remember what it felt like to float among those living stars, surrounded by love and absolute peace. There was no pain, fear, or regret, just a sense of belonging. This was more real than anything I had ever experienced in my earthly life. When I returned, however, I realized that many around me feared death. Megan, even though she was strong, confessed that the thought of losing me forever almost destroyed her. My fellow firefighters, who saw death often, seemed to view it as a cruel adversary, always waiting for its next victim. I knew I needed to share my new perspective, even though it was difficult to put what I experienced into words. Death, I explained, is just a transition, a change of state, like leaving a dark room and entering a place full of light. There is no eternal suffering, no complete loss. There is only continuity. However, I also knew that this truth was not something that was easy for everyone to accept. Some people listened to me with skepticism, others with tears in their eyes. I remember a fellow firefighter, Paul, who lost his brother in an accident. He confronted me during one of our conversations. "If it's so wonderful, why did you come back?" he asked, his eyes brimming with anger and pain. I took a deep breath before responding. "I came back because I still have work to do here. But Paul, I can guarantee you one thing. Your brother is not lost. He is at peace, and you will see him again." It was at that moment that I realized that my mission was not just to share my experience, but also to offer comfort to those suffering from grief. People needed to hear that they were not alone, and that their loved ones were safe, wherever they were. Over time, my message began to reach more people. Some believed, others didn't, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was fulfilling the purpose Arathiel had mentioned. Death was no longer something I feared. It was a release, a return home, and I was determined to help others see this too. As time passed, I began to understand the true purpose of my near-death experience. It wasn't just a personal transformation, but a calling to share what I had learned with as many people as possible. The message was simple but powerful. No one is truly lost, and death is not the end, but a transition to something greater. At first, it wasn't easy. Speaking openly about my experience was challenging, especially at a time when accounts like mine were met with skepticism. My first steps were to share my story with small support groups in my community in Big Sur. People who had lost loved ones came to me, desperate for comfort. A woman named Karen, who had lost her son in a car accident, had a profound impact on my journey. She arrived at one of the meetings with tired eyes, trembling hands, and a sadness that seemed to consume everything around her. After hearing my story, she asked me, "Do you think my son is at peace?" I looked straight into her eyes and, with a calm that seemed to come from Arathiel himself, replied, "I know he is, and I know he's still connected to you. The love you share is eternal, and nothing can separate you." Karen began to cry, but for the first time, those tears seemed to bring some relief. It was at that moment that I realized the impact my story could have. It wasn't about convincing or proving something to someone. It was about offering hope, something so many people desperately needed. As my message began to spread, I received invitations to speak at churches, universities, and community centers. Even though I was just a retired firefighter with an unusual story, people found comfort in what I said. It wasn't just the experience that touched people, but the message that every action, every choice, has a greater impact than we can imagine. In my talks, I often mentioned Arathiel and the spiritual beings I encountered. I talked about how they showed me that life is like a tapestry, where each thread represents a choice, a connection, or an emotion. When we are in the midst of chaos, we cannot see the complete pattern, but when we step back, we realize that every detail has its place. My mission became clear: to help people see that, regardless of the difficulties, their lives have meaning. We are all connected, and love is the force that sustains everything. Today, I still live in Big Sur, in the same house where I see the ocean stretching to the horizon. I continue to share my story, whether with large groups or just one person in need. With each story I tell, I feel like I'm fulfilling the promise I made to Arathiel, to live my life with purpose and help others find theirs. The experience changed who I am and how I see the world, and although I know my time here on Earth is limited, I am no longer afraid of what is to come, because in the end, I know that the essence of who we are is never lost. It just comes home. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, Leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.